Well, it is roughly 11 o'clock, which means that it's time to start the first ViniMark webinar for 2023. And as has become our tradition, we're going to start the year by doing a sort of intellectual impression of a chameleon, where we cast one eye back to 2022 and what it has meant for the South African wine industry. And then we're going to cast the other eye forward into 2023 to see what opportunities await us. But as is always the case with ViniMark webinars, our goal is to provide practical takeaways and actionable advice, which means that we also need to talk about some of the big obstacles that are in our path on the year ahead, from perpetual blackouts to bottle shortages to shipping delays. But not to worry, you'll see it's going to be a fascinating hour because our panel is nothing short of remarkable. First up, we have Andrew Douglas, who is the Group MD of Southern Skies Investment Holdings. And if you have no idea who that is, well, they are the owners of wine.co.za, of Cyberseller, of Seller Direct, of Vintelligence, and The Wine Show. Then we have Duncan McLennan, who is a brand strategy and innovation specialist. He's also the founder of Sunny and happens to be the man with one of the most fascinating brains I think I've ever encountered. Then we have Rico Besson, the Managing Director of Vinpro, and finally, ViniMark CEO, Eckhard Gerber. So really a stellar panel. Rico, I wanted to start the conversation by referencing a chat that you and I had this time last year. At the start of 2022, we were facing glass shortages, inflation of 15%, excessive stock buildup, which then meant cash flow problems for producers. But then we were also experiencing massive growth in exports and in new markets like China and Nigeria. So at the start of 2023, what is our ratio like of good news to bad news?
Jonah, morning. I saw the word for 2022 was perma-crisis, meaning we seem to evolve in these crises now ongoing and actually getting used to it seemingly. No, it's good to talk to you. On your question of balancing, I would argue that there are really green shoots, silver linings, and then there are real depressing things like Eskom. But high level, I think last time we spoke, we were still sitting as an industry on massive levels of unsold stock, and that picture really came out of the alcohol ban situation. Which meant that there was huge pressure on pricing. And one of my biggest fears was that given cash flow pressures, that wineries and exporters would start dumping, which would really nullify the great work we've been doing over years. Now, I'm glad to say on that point, and that score, we did not do that. I actually think the industry operated very responsible. And in a lot of cases, we shipped unsold wine as vinegar, or industrial wine as we call it. So it's amazing. In the midst of COVID, I really thought that given the fact that these wineries are relatively small, we know the familiar names, but in essence 80% are SMEs, that recovery for the sector would take long. It would only be in 2025, and I must say I'm glad to say that that is happening sooner. And in actual fact, the highest sales internationally as well as domestically has meant, now coupled with a smaller 2023 crop, that we expect that the stock level of the sector will actually be in balance by mid this year. So that firstly is a positive to say. I think the quality is good. As you say, the export results was not the greatest. I mean, we really struggled with the harbor and the port and the shipping disruptions. But 375 million liters going to the key markets, as you've said. The one market perhaps that went a bit south is China, given their lockdowns and ongoing geopolitical aspects. But Africa had a solid performance around that. So I think if you look at the bigger mechanics, Jonah, we've moved volumes, we've managed to retain price. I now think this season the producers will get an inflationary plus 3-4% adjustment. But the cost side is the one that is really worrisome. Last year we had 15% at farm level. I just had a look early morning at the cost of diesel for the wineries. This is just the operational cost, and we're talking 300-400 million rand additionally that needs to be absorbed at farms and winery level. This excludes the purchase of generators if you can find them. So I think a lot of the good work on the revenue line is nullified, unfortunately, short-term at the farming level. Part of the lower crop is things like farmers that could not pump enough irrigation water due to these bans. So short-term, very difficult. Longer term, I'm bullish, a lot more bullish than I may sound short-term. I think green shoots are tourism that's recovering. I think the stock situation means that we can market focus. The industry will shrink. It will shrink quite a bit, about 10%, and we will lose a lot of Colombar and Chenin Blanc, which typically goes to dry white generic stuff. And I think for the South African industry to be successful, we know this. We can't keep on trading commodity and compete with Spain. We will never win that war. So structural change, regional change, areas that are really suffering at the moment is the Orange River Jono due to climate, frost, flood. And we've got an industry that is indeed moving east. And we can see the impact of climate on site-specific aspects. So a mixed bag, as you can hear it. I'm not as down and gloomy as I was 12 months ago, but I think in all fairness, we are navigating a recession economy with all these other aspects.
Fantastic. Well, I think one of the encouraging things for producers who are feeling a bit low is that you as Vinpro have been very busy behind the scenes, trying to put mechanisms in place that will help the industry. Now, I know you recently launched a new organization called the SA Wine NPC. It's not going to win any awards for creativity in the name, but I wondered if you could unpack how the new company will operate and what this will mean for the industry.
Yeah, Jonathan, thanks for that. Look, on a lighter note, we also have got brandy in there. So it's a big win to have the name wine and not brandy. But nevertheless, no, look, we started actually just before COVID. Given all these shocks and different aspects to navigate, we have got, I think the two more well-known industry names would be Vinpro or would be WOSA, the Export Council, but we actually have six different companies who all does brilliant work within the area of focus. But what is lost is the linkages, the resourcing, the communication, the marketing side. And so we said, having a critical look at all these services, we need to dissect what is really needed. If we want to win this game, the way we play should be different. We do see huge consolidation at the front side, be that brands or wineries or producers, and on a really similar basis. We just said getting down to call it an umbrella body, by lack of a better words, which is very much what the New Zealand guys did and what the Australians and the Chileans has got. So yes, I announced it last week. It is a new company. We will now migrate a lot of these services ranging from tourism to transformation and research into this new body. And I do think that the big drive for this is impact and efficiency. And making sure we get bang for buck and we get the results, because things like competitiveness internationally, Jono, is worrying me. We make great quality wine, but in all fairness, the Chileans and New Zealand and others are taking a lot more benefit in the market due to government support and other things. And I think these are the real elephants that we need to tackle. And I'm positive that as a collective as a body, but a collective on the industry side as well, this can be done. So I think it's exciting. It's a lot of change, but it's the right time for that.
Yeah, so just keeping it in the realms of practicality, I know you mentioned in an address recently, I think it was at Vinpro Day, you mentioned that almost 40% of wine producers in the last year were running at a loss. I think it was 38%. Yeah. So can you, kind of in practical terms, how will this body help to change that in the kind of support that they'll, where will there be a step up in producer support?
Yeah, if we look at the COVID period and the alcohol bans, I think they already we experienced some, as I call it, fault lines. So what you struggle with is who's accountable for what, how do we get to a consensus position. So in essence, a lot of the funding that goes to industry bodies is for what I would theme the advocacy part. This is the dealings with government or governments international, looking at trade, looking at excise, looking at health. So in essence, I think there's strength in a very, very focused approach and a single voice for wine speaking with the powers that be. Now, the powers that be in our case are 10 different government departments, ranging from tourism to treasury. That's one part. The second part would be, what are the important growth areas? And that's why I say you look at enterprise development, you look at funding for transformation. So what we've done, which I think is to me a big positive for last year, is we've revised the industry strategy. I think COVID really meant we had to turn and relook. And then we managed to ink the wine industry into the National Master Plan for Agriculture, which I think is a much long overdue step. It not only gives recognition to the wine sector as a priority sector within agriculture, but it also gives us, I think, priority access to talk to all these different departments. And like it or not, Jonah, there cannot be a future for us without government support, and we need to work hard and grind our teeth. So for the sectors to survive, we need to have a stable taxation regime, for example. We need to have the tourism support. We need to have the acceleration of an Africa trade agreement. So there is no silver bullet, but there are different things to achieve. And to me, we're fixing accountability. To me, we're fixing the feedback to the producers on sustainability. And we have agility that's much overdue. So that in high level is what I think we want to achieve here.
Fantastic. It sounds like a really promising venture. And I wish you the best on that. So I want to shift the conversation to Eckhart for a bit, because we also had this chat last year, Eckhart, and we were then touching on how on consumption sales were practically on life support at the start of 2022, and that we'd explored these packaging innovations like canned wine and found that because of various lockdowns, that was an absolute non-starter. And we've done a whole lot of work on canned wine, and then found that bag and box was all the rage and that everyone was going to massive, bigger units. My question is, have the headlines changed at all for Vinimark sales networks into 2023, or are the trends holding as they were a year ago?
Good morning, Jono. Yeah, thanks. It's an interesting one. I've been contemplating of late whether the absence of any significant new trends is maybe the new trend. But certainly from my perspective, I think we've seen a bit of a holding pattern, and maybe less focus on topics that over the last couple of years were all the rage: low and no alcohol and different packaging types, etc. Speaking specifics, absolutely. I think cans are still difficult, and not too many have made it work. I think there's one notable player, and that's probably at the price point and the value where there's an offering of 6 cans for under 100 Rand. But no one else has really cracked it with cans. And then on the other side of the size spectrum, you've got the bag and box that's done really well, whether it's 5 litre or 3 litre. The bigger formats have really done well, and to a certain extent, it's resulted in some range reduction on the glass, on the bottled wine. On the plus side, I think for the first time since COVID, we're seeing a bit of volume increase, at least on 750ml glass. I think a lot of the old stuff still hold true. Red wine growing ahead of white, and then to a large extent, the recovery is in red blends and Chenin leading that recovery, with Sauvignon Blanc still struggling. So in terms of trends, not a lot going on. The good news, of course, is that on-con has recovered or continues its recovery, which is fantastic. The wine lists are getting a little bit bigger. The restaurants may be getting a little bit more adventurous with their wine lists. And then we possibly seeing a trend with more premium and super premium wine by the glass offerings in restaurants, which I think is really encouraging. So you're seeing some consumers engaging with that and willing to try wine by the glass at a higher price point. Just the other channels, as far as the gross channel is concerned, that's mostly recovered with a full year of promotion behind them. The independents have probably consolidated a little bit. You'll recall that through COVID, the independents did really well, comparatively speaking, to on consumption and to the gross environment. And then I think no news to any of us as far as online is concerned. And maybe Andrew will touch on it, or I'm sure Andrew will touch on it later. The online side of the business has kind of pulled back significantly. Consumers have to a large extent returned to their normal buying patterns. It's still a convenience purchase, I think, and probably more so at the premium end. So yeah, that's it really. Not a hell of a lot of new trends, I don't think. It's probably a bit of a continuation. And then I think the overriding principle is that the consumer's careful with the income at their disposal, and quality and value is key.
So it's interesting that you noted the kind of bottom of the range sales, bag and box mostly is still solid, and then you've got the premium end at the top, even by the glass in smaller quantities, is also seemingly doing well. What would be your ideas as to why that might be? This kind of the middle seems to be either stagnant or shrinking, but bottom and top are doing really well. Can you talk to that point a little?
Yeah, that middle is a difficult part of the market. Naturally, disposable income comes at a premium, and bag and box. We've seen it right through. Bag and box has done exceptionally well. But I think at the top end, you've probably got a couple of aspects playing into it. One is that those with higher disposable incomes were probably a little bit more resilient to what's happened during COVID. You've probably spent less in restaurants and more at home. And then also, I think it's to a large extent, it's aspirational. And well-known brands at higher price points are doing well. So yeah, I think there are a few aspects that played into it, but certainly you're 100% correct. We see bag and box growth, and then also at the premium and super premium level, above 200 Rand a bottle even.
Well, I guess it's encouraging that consumers are able to act on their aspirations, because that hasn't necessarily been the case in the last couple of years.
It's maybe a little bit easier than buying a new 2 million Rand vehicle. Yeah,
yes, exactly. So looking at this kind of picture that you just laid out, as far as Vinimark is concerned, what are the challenges that are really kind of front and center for you, that need your immediate attention at the start of this year?
The loud and the red siren we all know about. I think producer price inflation is significant. It's huge. And we spoke about it just before we joined, but there seems to be, I think generally speaking, at the start of the year, there's a sense of optimism. There's, especially in the wine industry, there's anticipation for the new harvest. This year, I feel that it's a little bit muted. I think everyone is concerned about the challenges that we faced during 2022 and also those coming through in 2023. I think the perspective here is important, though. This is not a wine industry issue. It's not a South Africa issue. We're seeing it right across the world. I think the Brits dubbed it the cost of doing business crisis. And it's a tough one. The reality for many of the wine producers is a really tough one. And cash flow is under huge pressure. So just looking at it from an energy perspective, Rico mentioned Eskom. We don't want to dwell on that too much, but in the European context, it's maybe the geopolitical and the war that's happening there. In the South African context, it's more the failings of government and what's been happening over many years. I think our energy generation is at levels that we saw in 2004. and which certainly doesn't aid any economic growth. And then on the way home yesterday, I was listening to the radio, and you hear stories about Astral, the poultry producer, and they're expecting their earnings to drop by 90%. And by all accounts, it's now costing them in input costs, it's costing them R2 more to produce a chicken than they're able to sell it for. So yeah, I think it's a really, really tough environment. Wine specific, how do we get that producer price inflation through to the consumer? And that's the tricky bit. That's the balancing act. I think at moments, the producer inflation is probably more than double consumer inflation. So it's going to take some time to pass that on to the consumer. Yeah, so how we do that is, I think, the trick. We know that for less elastic brands, it's going to be tricky to balance the risk of losing sales with putting through an increase in price. And the reality is that applies to most brands. I think it's only a few of them that have the luxury of putting up the price and not really seeing a drop off in sales. So a very real risk, losing market share to competitors in wine, losing market share potentially both in wine, but also to beer and cider. We expect that some really brand loyal customers might have to move brands as they're not keeping up with inflationary pressures. You're probably going to see, especially in a gross environment, you're going to see more high-low promotional mechanics. And potentially more people buying on promotion only. So yeah, massive pressure on cash flows all around. Input costs, certainly the most pressing issue. And then just kind of talking broadly about energy and water supply. It's probably not a challenge for 2023 only, but a challenge looking a little bit further. And if we're talking sustainability, and climate change and drought into the future, I think we need to work really hard on solutions to become self-sufficient rather than being reliant on government to provide us with a steady supply of electricity and water.
So that is a long, dark list, and thanks for laying it out in such detail. But what I've loved about Vinimark in the last couple of years, and they have been dark, is that you guys as a company came out really rather well, it would feel, at least from a reputation perspective, because you did what was necessary to support your producers. And in many senses, it was kind of just the manner of doing business was in itself a kind of force for good that saw businesses doing better. So if I can put that reputation on you as a company, what are the opportunities that excite you in the year ahead, given the long dark list that you outlined?
Thanks for that, Jono. Yeah, I think overriding all of that probably is the sense that out of challenge always comes opportunity. So we've been dealt a stack of cards. I don't think we ever want to be reactive only. We've got to look forward. We've got to understand what our current challenges are, what the future challenges might look like. But we don't have much of an alternative. We've got to do what's right. We've got to look into doing sustainable business. And sustainable business is doing what's right for everyone in the value chain. So that's really kind of the perspective that we're working from. And to a certain extent, as tough as it might be, to try and embrace those and look for those opportunities coming out of the really tough times. So sure, looking at opportunities going forward, it's tough. We know, for instance, that the trends that we spoke about earlier will probably continue to a certain extent. I think if you look at the growth of 5 litre from a Vinimark perspective, that's, for instance, not really part of our business model, but we view that as a positive. You know, if the 5-liter wine drinker stays in the wine market, I think in time, again, speaking to the aspirational aspect and the development of taste profile, we're going to see more wine sales into the 750 ml glass. There's opportunity in MCC. We're seeing that, specifically with the introduction of more demi-secs into the range. What else did we see last year? We saw that champagne was at a premium, and supply issues there probably gives us an opportunity for more premium offerings in the MCC market. We spoke about the growth above the 200 Rand a bottle. And then we always look at innovation. As much as it's a bit of a back to basics approach from many of the wineries, and maybe not exploring potentially as much as they did before, and maybe consolidating what they're doing and really focusing on what they're doing, we know that innovation is key. If we're talking primary packaging, that's really important. So I think the mindset required is very important. I don't think we want to. I don't think we can afford to get stuck on the challenges, and we've really just got to look at the opportunities. We're in a fantastic industry, and it's certainly much better than being in industrial abrasives. So we really just got to make sure that we manage the cash and that we get through all of this. Sorry, I'm rambling on a little bit, but yeah, I think it's a wide set of challenges, and I think the opportunities are certainly there, but it's going to be slightly different for everyone. But certainly focus.
And even though you said it's not really a central part of your business model, would you say that producers who don't have bag-and-box products right now are missing a trick, and that should be a kind of basic bottom line of defense, or are you not going to come out that strong in favor of bag-and-box?
No, I don't think so. I think that's a different game. To a certain extent, it's probably more commodity trading than building a wine brand. I think there are opportunities. We saw 2 liters coming into it, but yeah, I don't think that everyone should be chasing the trend or chasing where there's a perception of money. You can sell a lot of wine and still not make any profit. So I think it's. I think we've got to think about things. We've got to not make any rash decisions, but certainly we've got to make decisions. So hoping for the best is not much of a strategy. But yeah, I wouldn't suggest that everyone moves into 5 liters. No.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, it comes down to these 2 great points that you made. Is like partially doing what is right. That is your baseline, and I think that's incredible. And the other thing is, you talked about mindset, and I think one of that little throwaway line, it's possible to sell more wine but to make less profit. So in the face of these inflation issues, as well as cash flow issues, perhaps the mindset needs to be one of doing what's right for both the producer, or for the producer and their employees, rather than simply the consumer. Because at the end of the day, if you manage to maintain market share, but your profitability is way down, that's going to cause problems in itself. So it feels like you're saying there needs to be a sense of bravery to it all, which I really appreciate.
Absolutely.
So I want to turn the conversation to Duncan, because we've spent this time talking about difficulty. And Duncan, you've a company that's called Sunny, which I love I just love the name. And now, usually you haven't been on one of these ViniMark webinars before, but what we often do is we go around the perennial problem and solution bush, where we outline a problem and then we hunt down a solution, and then find another problem and hunt down a solution. But from what I sense, from what you're doing, you'd say that we'd skipped a few steps in the process, and that before we start finding solutions, we actually need to change something. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us more about your framework or your modus operandi at Sunny, and how it might apply to producers in the wine industry?
Good stuff. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. It's been really interesting as someone who sits completely outside of this industry, listening to both Eckhard and Rico's contributions there. Certainly a lot of challenges facing the industry, but also immense opportunity. You know, I think when it comes to Sunny, I would need to take a step back to introduce the framework, I suppose. So the business was founded in July 2020. So, you know, right in the peak of the global meltdown, where we were all running around like headless chickens, not quite sure where on earth things were going to pan out. But the business was, you know, at that stage, I was surrounded by, having, you know, spent my career in the creative and consulting industry, surrounded by business leaders of all statures, from global multinationals to small and medium-sized enterprises. People were just quite paralyzed by the uncertainty that lay ahead of us. And it was causing major issues in their business. So Sunny was developed out of a desire to utilize optimism as a lever, built in with some rigorous strategic planning and futures thinking to help those businesses build sustainable growth into the future. So that's what we do. We use futures thinking and strategy to create sustainable growth for brands and businesses. For those of you that don't or aren't familiar with the term futures thinking, that is really the practice of enabling people to step out of the minutiae of the day-to-day, to take a bit of a longer-term view of the future. Certainly not something enough businesses do more often, despite the fact that it has massive commercial benefits to their business. But what futures thinking does is it enables a longer-term view. It utilizes imagination to start to build forecasts and scenarios of what future situations may look like for those respective industries. And then what we do is we take insight from the world around us in the current space. What is true around us today that we can implement an action to build sustainable strategic growth plans into those futures where we believe attainable opportunities lie. So really our model from a brand growth perspective has 4 quadrants that we work with. So we work, or certainly something that we've built that we believe defines a sustainable growth framework. And that is centered around people and culture. So we really like to start within an organization before we move outside. I think it's an essential part of how a business operates, that it is culturally aligned within itself before it plays out into the world that it's trying to engage. We then look at brand. So that's how brands are positioned, brand identity, brand strategy, that type of thing. So how is that brand planning on engaging and captivating the market that they are aiming to attract? We then look at commerce. So specifically, how are brands enabling engagement with their audience? How are they finding meaningful, frictionless pathways to purchase? How are they making that purchase occasion and environment as seamless and easy as possible for their customers? And then lastly, it's innovation. So what is that business doing? What is that brand doing to continue to build competitive advantage, to continue to identify new opportunities for growth and action those? Because, you know, in times of strife, we can sometimes become so focused on the short term that innovation becomes completely deprioritized. And what ends up happening is we lose ground against our competitors. So, you know, we try and help the brands we work with develop cultures of experimentation. Innovation doesn't necessarily mean having to develop a full new range of products that you launch and plow millions and millions of rands into. Innovation should really be a series of much more cost-effective, smaller experiments that can validate an opportunity before it gets scaled and taken into market. So that is the model that we utilize with the people we work with. And really, I guess the process involves a comprehensive audit across those respective pillars to understand where that respective business lies. You know, where are its challenges? Where are opportunities, and what are priorities that business needs to address? And different categories, different types of businesses, they really range in terms of where they sit and perform within that grid, I suppose. But the fundamental purpose is to work with business leaders to instill optimism within their cultures, to really elevate the importance of optimism in that process, but doing that by taking a longer term view of the future, and really starting to identify opportunities that the business can grow into through a series of meaningful experiments and trial.
So, I mean, so that all sounds amazing. It sounds like like a lot of fun, imagining a better world and then stepping into that better world. But it still feels like for producers that would be a really nice to have. You know, wouldn't it be so great if we had time to do that? And that's why you talk about, you see, we try to get people to step out of the day-to-day. But for some people, that feels impossible. And you said in some of our previous chats, in a particularly mammoth voice note, which I'm going to keep forever just as a souvenir. It's not often that you get 10-minute voice notes, but I've received one. Amazing. You mentioned that that optimism is not some naive or privileged position, okay? But you feel it is essential to business success. So I'm still trying to understand, how does someone who's just desperately trying to make ends meet and get through the day-to-day, can you maybe practically talk about an example perhaps of how an attitude of optimism is essential to stepping up or stepping out, as opposed to something that works from time to time? If my question makes sense to you.
Yeah, well, I think, look, the starting point there is to just, I suppose, clarify what optimism is, actually, because as a brand person, I think that optimism has a brand problem. I think its perception is one of, I guess, you know, we've all got that friend that is just continually glass half full. You know, every situation is going to be fine. It'll be fine. Just relax. It'll be cool. Take it easy. Everything will work out in the end. That is what I would call blind optimism, and that can, you know, in reality, that's a bit foolish, and is actually coming from a position of privilege. If you can just sit and wait something out for something, then you are quite privileged. Whereas actually, I suppose the optimism I'm talking about is bloody hard work. It's actually quite brutal. It's like coming out of a fight with a bloody nose, actually, because optimism is actually, for me, I suppose the meta that defines the rate of progress that we judge our lives and our businesses by. It's an outlook that is essential, in my view, to innovating and to building constructive growth into these futures that the challenges we face, you know, like I said, listening to Eckhart and Rico, like this industry faces so many complex challenges. And it's going to continue to face complex challenges for years to come. But, you know, having a sense of optimism leaning into that means that we are action orientated. We're not passive. This type of optimism creates competitive advantage, I feel, because we're looking at things as not necessarily opportunities, not believing things are going to work out, rather understanding that things could well actually get harder, but taking on a sense of ownership of that future, being less of a passenger on this very wild ride, because, you know, you talk about government failure. I mean, that's the wildest ride we can face. You know, if an industry relies on government to deliver for it in this country, well, you better buckle in, because I don't know if it's going to happen. You know, so it's about assuming ownership. It's about understanding that actually maybe your brand, your business plays a bigger role in society than just creating and marketing products to people. I loved what Eckhart said about doing what's right for everyone in the value chain. That is an optimist view, you know. That is a very, very constructive view as to how you're going to grow sustainably into the future, because sustainable growth can't be this really sharp growth curve that reaches a cliff edge. Sustainable growth has got to be longer term, and it's got to mean equitable growth for more than just the owner of the business. It's got to apply itself across the value chain. So, you know, being able to look at all of these different constituent parts that make up a brand or business, and understanding how that business stacks up from an optimism perspective is really critical. And then, you know, building action plans, we can actually start to implement things, I guess, to move things forward. You know, these winemakers, I guess, are entrepreneurs. You know, at the end of the day, entrepreneurs are the ultimate optimists. They move the world forward. They're kind of like scientists. You know, the mad scientist should be reincarnated as the mad entrepreneur. because you've got an innate belief that you're going to make something better. And I guess, in the world we live in right now, it's very cynical. It's very easy to be pessimistic. And that's a great opportunity for me, from a business perspective, is to truly lean into optimism, because that can create a lot of success and opportunity.
Well, that's beautiful. I love the comparison between blind optimism and brutal optimism.
Yeah,
and perhaps
it's not.
perhaps yeah,
it's really not easy, especially when if you're running a big business, it's a challenging thing. So it will often feel like you're doing 15 rounds with Mike Tyson, but it's it's worth it.
but I suppose that's the thing, right? Maybe a blood nose should be the icon for 2023, because if you got a fight ahead of you, you either step into the ring or you don't. If you don't step into the ring, that is giving up, right? That is it's waiting for the world to happen to you. And that sense of, I guess, maybe active optimism or is taking the shot. And I think that's beautiful.
Taking the shot. And lastly, John, just to add, it's taking ownership. And your question touched on, where do people find the time for this? You have to make the time. You have to find, and this doesn't require, the irony is that this type of practice has a perception that you need weeks and months to do it. You really don't. You really don't. And it has significant proven benefits to businesses that employ it in whatever scale that they are able to. Some people are able to apply more time to it, some aren't, but not applying it is the failure, in my view.
Rico, can you add to that thought?
Yeah, thanks, Jonah. Yeah, I just thought, well, two perspectives. We do see a lot of foreign investment coming in, and I always make a point to try and speak to those investors almost with are you crazy? Why? And I just wrote down, behind all of this smoke and difficulty, over the last 12 months, how many transactions there's been. I mean, just the foreign ones has been Simons Vlei Winery, Netlandshof, Kleine Zaltse, Ridgeback, and then domestically you'll have Ormond, Blauklip, and Daxburg, Sonhof. I mean, so there is a lot of change of ownership on brand and winery, and then you've got at least 3 new wineries that were built. So when I ask the internationals, well, why? They say 3 or 4 things consistently. They say, number one, you guys are absolutely obsessed with the short term as South Africans. You are worried about Ramaphosa, and I mean, you need to take a 10-year view, and you need to accept there will be 2 other presidents. That's number one. You just short term. Number 2, we buy into amazing quality, terroir. Call it what you want, all over the world, you've got that, and it fits the portfolio. Number 3, we buy a bargain because you are absolutely so skeptical about your future. So we buy that. And then number 4, people. I mean, you've got amazing talent in your people. Now, to me, there's something in there that this crisis is also pulling us into something we've been debating, Jonah, is why don't we have big brands? Now, I think what's happening here is that we are being sucked into global distribution. It's very much similar to New Zealand, who we always look at with envy. But the top 5 New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc brands, only 1 of them are New Zealand owned. Eh? The other 4 is Constellation, Accolade, Treasury. And therefore, one needs to almost take yourself out of your situation if you can. And you'll find it's not that unique. And from an investor perspective, perhaps make a point also to have a discussion with why. Why do we see these changes, and why will it make a difference? Because what I find at the moment, producer level, with all these negativity, they are almost starstruck. They just don't move. They don't plant. They don't sell. But if you look carefully, there is a lot of change, which I think is the exciting part, and will stand us in good stead. So I just thought, to Duncan's point, that's the ad from my side, that yeah, don't self-pity yourself. You might find nobody else care that much. Eh? Thanks.
And then Eckhart, you also wanted to add into that.
Yeah, thanks. I think one of the things that we've got to be so mindful of is when things get tough, we have a tendency of going underground, battening the hatches, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's exactly the wrong thing. You've got to put yourself out there. You've got to keep on engaging. You've got to keep on engaging outside of your business. Keep on having those conversations, but also inside of your business. You look at very practical things. We are in a tough environment. We spoke about inflation and the pressure on the consumer. So to add insult to injury, you're very likely going to face a situation where you've got employee wage demands because they're growing poorer. So I think it's so important to keep those conversations going. And then I love Duncan's analogy of slugging it out with a heavyweight boxer and getting a bit of a bloody nose. I think once we get through the tough times, you're going to find that if you've kept on engaging and communicating, your business is going to be in such good shape. And as a team, you're going to be just really primed to take your business forward.
Yeah. Well, again, coming back to what you said about doing what's right for all the people in the chain, I truly believe in South Africa, we often underestimate the strength that can be given to a business by having an employee body or staff body that feel like they belong and that they are cherished. I think the businesses that can find a way to achieve that are immediately far more resilient. And sometimes we think of resilience purely in the balance sheet, but there's something to be said for the employees who put in 150% because they feel like they're part of a business that is going somewhere and that is taking strides forward. So yeah, Duncan, before we move on, because I would love to chat to Andrew, but just let me know your thoughts on to kind of bring this section to a close.
No, I was just going to build on that for a second, and just, I suppose, the funny thing about business in South Africa is, if you look at globally, there's been a lot of talk around brand purpose for the last 3 or 4 years. It's the marketing buzzword of the last while. But I believe that in South Africa we've been so far ahead of the curve in that respect, because our businesses and our brands effectively operate as citizens. And the brands and businesses that are going to succeed into this future are the ones that humanize themselves with their staff. So to build on what Eckhart was saying there, that communication that you need to have, that awareness of the value chain is actually quite an innately South African thing, because we don't have a system that caters for anything less. So the more we can apply rigor in those respects, the more we can continue to reinforce our position and culture as brands and businesses, and what role we play in the greater economy. And that can be through the value chain, but also even emotionally, just talking about this category in wine and the emotional role it plays for the person that's purchasing it. Understanding the context that you play in that person's life is really, really important. So being distinctly human as we move forward is so critical, and really displaying those emotional behaviors, I guess, internally and externally, and through your brands is fundamental to achieving growth.
Amazing. Thanks, Duncan. So I feel like this has been quite a rich section of the discussion so far, but in some senses it's been talking about a kind of active optimism that we need to roll out in the future. But I want to bring you into the conversation, Andrew, because it feels like, we chatted a little bit last year, and what struck me most by our conversation was that you were very much all living in, and had been for some time, this kind of active optimism, this investment, this expansion. And if anyone is running their business under a blue skies approach, it's you. So while many have been battling down the hatches, you seem to have been breaking them off. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit perhaps about what are you seeing that other people are missing, or is it just an innate understanding of this brutal active optimism?
Yeah, I think it's probably all of those things. It's such an interesting discussion and hearing obviously the different perspectives. But I just want to start by saying, and you mentioned the entrepreneur and the mad scientist, so I need to get my lab coat out, I think. But Someone said to me once, which really resonated with me quite early on in our journey in the COVID, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right. And what that basically means is you decide ultimately if you can or can't do something, no one else. And that's something that I've tried to embrace. And to be honest, many days it's been blind optimism, I'll be honest, you know. But you obviously need to be pragmatic. You know, life's not all sunshine, unicorns and rainbows, but as I see it in business, there's essentially two things: how it is and what it could be, or how it could be. And with point number two, and to some of the things that Duncan was saying earlier in terms of, you know, goals and aspirations, and more importantly, your mindset, it's totally reliant on those things. A positive mindset is needed for growth. A positive mindset is needed for positive outcomes. You know, you have to see it to believe it, and you have to believe it to achieve it. I mean, it sounds a bit corny. I mean, where's Tony Robbins? He can take over now, but it is what it is. And you really get to choose which mindset that you feed, which mindset you invest in. And from my own experience, those may or may not know quickly, I mean, we had a successful event business wine show, top of star wine show with 7 metros, 200 producers, 30,000 consumers. And March 2020, things came to a grinding halt for us. And in hindsight, it was the best thing that could ever happen to us, because, you know, it allowed us to start again with a clean slate, space and time to reimagine our business and redefine our why, I suppose. One of the points that I came to was the fact that I hadn't been trying hard enough, was coasting, could do a lot more than what I was doing. And it really, you know, gave us an opportunity to consider what challenges face the SA wine industry, and which ones. Obviously there are lots, but we decided, you know, which ones we had the capacity, the capability, and the skill set to find solutions for. So, you know, that old cliche that in great challenge lies great opportunity rings really true, and it'd be great if more people embraced that. We fortunately found, you know, partners. I think there is always a financial realism about this. I get that. I'm not naive. We were lucky in the fact that, you know, the vision that we had built, we found great partners in Yella who invested in our business and shared our vision, and we've built a strong foundation now for a business that's ready for serious scale. And, you know, you mentioned people. Oh, geez, that no better point could have been made about the importance of culture in your business in times of difficulty. And you know, fortunately, because one thing I think I'm reasonably good at, it's finding the right people, and not much else. But we've collected a talented team of business builders with entrepreneurial spirit and a common vision for success. But none of that could have been achieved without a healthy dose of optimism, and, you know, maybe a spoonful of crazy as well. But specifically in terms of the new opportunities, I think generally speaking, and I mean, I'm an Aussie, as you all know. I've been here for 20 years. I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. You know, I really am totally committed to, you know, the future of South Africa and this industry. But you know, in terms of where I think the new opportunities are, I'd like to see more collaboration, particularly in times of hardship, between producers, between stakeholders. And, you know, Rico's done a great job navigating some pretty stormy seas, but, you know, I'd like people in the industry to take more ownership of that process themselves and not wait to be invited. In terms of, there's one thing that I thought there was an opportunity of, and it's obviously also, you know, taking into account what Eckhard said earlier. Even though online sales obviously have normalized, it's a pretty radical time for online sales in 2020 and 21. Obviously, there was no other way to buy wine, but we're still pretty bullish in terms of the growth that's expected over the next 5 years. And with that in mind, I mean, our business is totally focused on enabling SA wine producers to sell direct to customer or to consumer, and to get a major share of that business. So unlocking that opportunity. And, you know, with profitability being one of the greatest challenges, and D2C, you know, being relatively or comparatively profitable, more profitable, I think that can have a significant impact, particularly for micro and small producers. And just to be clear, that's not at the expense of on and off premise sales at all. We just simply need to find more South Africans choosing wine over other beverages, and we need to find more international customers choosing South African wine over other countries.
So Eckhart mentioned earlier that from Vinimark's perspective, they saw e-commerce dropping. I wondered if you had experienced a similar thing with looking at your business model.
Well, for those that you know, we've had an interesting year in the e-commerce space, obviously, with the business that we acquired the sort of Q3 of last year, which obviously had its own story to tell. So certainly, yes, that didn't do as well as it did the year before, that's for sure. But we're fighting back there and turning that around. But yes, overall, absolutely. 22 definitely saw a decline on previous years, on 21. But as I said, in terms, if you look at the 2019 figures, they're more from our perspective anyway. So it's a question of a normalization occurring. And then I'm not sure who said it earlier. I think it was Rico talking about why the international investors were coming in. A long-term view is required. But I mean, if you look at global trends, if you look at general trends in e-commerce outside of the beverage sector, there's definitely, you know, cause for optimism.
Great. Well, I mean, you mentioned we talk about a long-term view like it's a choice, but sometimes a long-term view is also a luxury, especially if you're one of the 40% of producers who are running at a loss, which is why I think it was so important that you mentioned partners. And if we combine Eckhart's notion of really thinking hard about your mindset, and you mix that with looking actively for partners who share that mindset, then a long-term view and the ability to step out of the day-to-day is a little more doable. I think it's putting all those together in order to equip yourself to be able to operate in that less day-to-day, more long-term pattern. But one of the earliest businesses that you started was a data insights company called Vintelligence, or at least here in South Africa. Can you tell us a little bit about, I mean, you overtly value data perhaps a little more than many in the wine industry. Can you tell me more about what the market opportunities are, given your look at the data?
Absolutely. I'll be delighted to share some insights. We actually were launching we're just about to release the latest Great Big Wine Survey report from 2022 next Friday the 3rd. I'm probably going to be stealing some of our director of intelligence, the lady that runs that business, Sania Vandermerve's thunder, by sharing some of these insights, but I'm sure she'll forgive me. But really encourage anyone on the call to register for that event next week, Friday the 3rd. There'll be a free report that's coming out of it. We're into our 3rd year, as I said, about to go back in the field again this year for number 4. Hollard has been a fantastic partner and supported that data. But we took a view in terms of, you know, finding ourselves and looking forward in 2020, you know, that information was required, that there was a gap in affordable data and consumer research. To be quite frank, we were sitting on a huge consumer database from Wine Show, and we thought that would be an interesting way to, you know, add some value or stay relevant, or to try and assist an industry that was going through some pretty tough times. So we sort of washed that out to our, you know, 200,000 database, and wasn't expecting too much, but we ended up getting 20,000 respondents to a 100-question questionnaire that took half an hour to complete, and clearly people were bored during the middle of 2020. But I'm being facetious, but it was really good insight, and we partnered with everyone. So Vinpro was involved with the tour, WOSA was involved, Sarvis was involved. We really put it out to everyone to, you know, what questions do we need to ask? It's not our survey, it's our survey. But to get to your point, there are some insights that I think would be interesting to the viewers or the listeners is understanding that the new consumer does not always mean young consumers. That was something that came out of the report. I seem to recall, and our assessment shows that new consumers to wine, especially in South Africa, of all age groups, and this means that entry to market products, specifically or typically those that are maybe slightly sweeter, should not just be limited to the young and sillies. 20% of consumers who sort of found wine are 45 plus. Second, new wine consumers are concerned about consumption levels. I think this is something that everyone knows, and you talk about the advent of no, low, and all those other groups. I mean, clearly people are becoming more responsible with their health these days, and sort of marketing and policy needs to address that. Comments like I'm worried I will drink too much was pretty high scoring on one of the questions, and followed by the usual concern about headaches and hangovers. But people are becoming more and more concerned about their health. So maybe that's the drink less but drink better strategy. Maybe, I'm not sure. And then in terms of the positioning of wine as a sophisticated product, I mean, past research, I remember in 2020, a lot of our feedback centered around, wine is limited to snobs or only for rich people and things like that. And we see the perception really changing with, the highest responses to those sorts of questions being, wine is for relaxing. It makes ordinary meals special. We've got a bit of a saying in our business that, get more out of mealtime. Everyone eats. Let's find a way to enhance the meal rather than necessarily directly selling the liquid in the bottle. And socializing was the third part of it. So I think this is a big win for the industry in terms of, brands have been working hard to position wine for a long time amongst a larger audience, and to position it as accessible. And having said that, they've also managed to do that without losing that sophistication element of wine. I mean, it's a classy drink. Yeah, and just again, just to remind everyone, please reach out to Zania or head to the website and register for the webinar, for our webinar next week. You'll get a great webinar and a free report to download that may help you and your business.
Yes, sorry if I missed it. Can you just give the details of the website again?
It's vintelligence.co.za, and if you don't know Zania, her email address is zania@vintelligence.co.za.
Fantastic. And then one last question for you, Andrew, because you are, if I understand correctly, in the process of planning the Cyberseller Wine Show for 2023, which will be the biggest consumer wine show in South Africa. Can you just tell us a little bit about A, the specifics that you're hoping to achieve with the show, and B, what this means for producers?
Absolutely, I'll be happy to. We had 8 wonderful years with Tops at Spa since we acquired the show in 2015, and Mark Robinson and the team there were great partners. But obviously during the last 3 years and the new direction, it made a lot more sense for us to sort of look in a different direction. Obviously focused on the online and direct customer space. So following the acquisition of Cyberseller last year, it made sense for us to rebrand the show and to work even harder and closer with exhibitors or wineries who were exhibiting to help them grow their D2C activities and their wine clubs. And I'm delighted to welcome Hardy McQueen, who's our new producer of the show, and Hardy's making his own waves in the SA wine industry. And under his leadership, I'm pretty excited where the show is going to go. And Hardy and I guess September, October last year, when we first started working together, identified 3 core themes that we wanted the show to fulfill or imbibe, and that was community, culture, and commerce. community in terms of extending and growing the wine community and getting it to a more diverse audience. Culture in terms of creating and building a new SA wine culture that is more inclusive. And commerce, bringing the SA audience and wine producers closer, thus enabling more commerce to occur. And when you talk about what we do in terms of direct customer, it sort of starts to make sense. Yeah, and I think you know, a more diverse industry can only strengthen and grow the value of what we have, you know, within the industry. Equity allows more people to participate and leverage those opportunities, and inclusion means creating spaces for different types of people within the ecosystem to share ideas, perspective, and growth for all. And we want to create an environment that's welcoming old as well as new wine lovers. And we see ourselves as one of the many bridges between producers and consumers to connect and engage. And these connections will come, you know, we'll see some opportunities to learn about new products, find new customers, and which lead to a bigger, stronger, and more diverse wine industry. And again, if anyone is interested in more information, they can visit wineshow.co.za or send me an email, or send us an email at hello@wineshow.co.za. We'll be starting up again in Joburg and Cape Town this year. And we'll be announcing venues and pricing in the next week or so.
Fantastic. Nice to hear more about people getting out and doing things. So well done there. So we're drawing to a close, but I did want to leave some space for Q&A from the audience. So if there are those of you who are watching who perhaps have some questions that you want to ask, now would be the right time. But I'd also want to find out if anyone on the panel perhaps has had something sparked by what one of the other panel members said and has intra-panel questions. So either one of those is now's the right time for that. Just going to see if there's anything from the audience. Okay, so seemingly yes, Andrew had a question or a comment.
Yeah, it's actually directed to Rico. I saw him share something on LinkedIn. I think it was yesterday, around the evolution or the growth of the WETA data, which, in terms of optimism and things to, you know, other ways to measure the direction in which an industry is going, I think is so powerful. Without answering the question, or answering the question I'm about to ask you, is you must feel the same way about that.
Well, absolutely. And again, it speaks to the self-confidence and the way we use these things that is perceived as compliance at farm level, but is world class. So I started an initiative in November last year to pull together the industry's formal sustainability position, because we've got excellence in pockets, Andrew, but we seemingly don't pull it together. And so I'm very hyped that in the next 2 months, we're going to create a far more central approach that can help industry, but also wineries. Also, I mean, we can even list the pre-approved service providers, from solar to anything else. So to me, dealing with the industry, we need to also address an easier way to do business, sharing best world-class examples, but also pull our shoulders back and make sure that we spearhead and lead where we indeed leading. So yes, you're right. I think great progress. We need to talk about that as well.
Thank you. Duncan, you had a question.
Yes, it was an open-ended question to the rest of the panel, actually, in the spirit of longer-term view, in the spirit of optimism and imagination. If you were to comment on the state of the wine industry in the year 2035, how would you, what is your prediction? How would you describe it to someone?
It's a great question. Yes, Eckhart.
Sure. I think it's a difficult one to describe, but adding on to what Andrew mentioned earlier, the concept of collaboration, but also inclusivity. I think that we've got an incredible opportunity to sell wine both domestically and overseas. So I think it's really just working together to see how we explore that opportunity, and to try and see how we can not sell more wine, but I suppose sell wine to more people. And that's what I'd like to see in, 2035, that especially in the South African context, we try and widen the market and sell wine to a lot more people.
When Vinimark did the main market webinar last year, one of the big points that came out was just touched on by what you said. You kind of corrected, I'm not trying to sell more wine, or I want to reach more people, or something along those lines. And I think that's a hugely important mindset, to remember that we're reaching people as opposed to the cold act of selling. I think that's a really good point that you made. But Andrew, do you want to answer Duncan's question?
Yeah. For me, crystal balling, it's a 2035 or what I'd love to see is and to Rico's point earlier about New Zealand and Australia and Chile, Argentina, government support, and in many ways having an advantage over South Africa in export markets. Is I have a feeling that we're going to see a massive uptick in international opportunities for South African wine. The story is so powerful, so compelling, so unique compared to those other countries I mentioned, that I reckon it's going to be very different to how it is now.
Duncan, it will be the sector to be in 2035. It will be slightly smaller. It will be double the value. Tourism will exponentially grow, and we will shift market left and right. But that will mean broadening consumer base, really creating ambassadors, seeing a lot more mergers coming through. Possible, absolutely. Value growth, double up.
So, Duncan, I just had one question for you as well. And I imagine you have some clients that are way more change averse than others. Okay. So, and maybe we just heard one of them now, but what are some really great exercises that you throw their way when you encounter someone who just hates change and your job is to help them see innovation? How do you get that ball rolling? Because I think a lot of us just need to know how to unlock the start of that process. What's a kind of innovative icebreaker that you might use?
I like to use an exercise called looking back to look forward, because a lot of risk averse or change averse people or businesses don't actually recognize how much change they've actually been a part of in their tenure within a business. So what we like to do is just take a bit of a timeline, like we look back over, say, a 10-year period, and get individuals or the individual to identify key moments of change that have affected that business, what the source of that change was and what the consequence of that change was. And then we start to shift forward, and then we start to imagine what the world looks like 10 years from now. And we take a very much more exploratory approach in that we look at consumer trends, business trends, cultural, that type of thing. And then we start to get people to play a bit of a game as to what, based on their knowledge of their business now, what could they imagine significant change moments being in the next 10 years. And in the space of a very short half-an-hour session, depending on the size of the team, you can immediately start to test everybody's thought muscle. That imagination really starts to come through, and then we start to get people in the room. And we start to realize that you shouldn't be worried about the time implication and the perception of thinking a little bit longer term. It's more about how you build it as a practice into what you're already doing. And that generally works quite well. But just contextualizing that they've actually been a part of it without even knowing is really important. Practical examples that they are intimately involved in or have been a part of helps them start to navigate a future view.
That's amazing. Eckhart, I think you had one last comment you wanted to make.
Yeah, thanks, John. And maybe just back to the previous question on 2035. And I'm convinced and I think we're working strongly to that we're going to reach that way before 2035. But as much as value and growth is important, of course, the elephant in the room is profitability. So I think looking at it from a sustainability picture in a broader sense, where you talk people, environment, all of those things, I'm convinced that we're going to find a lot more smarter solutions to, if you're looking at farming practices and in the cellar, that we do things a lot smarter, but also more effectively and less costly.
Okay, so I feel like this has been a really rich discussion, and I know we've gone a little bit over time, but what I'm going to do is summarize the main points. Hopefully I don't miss anything out, and then we're all done. To me, I feel like this conversation can be summed up by a sort of series of celebrity conceptual death matches. And so first up, what we have is considering how things are in front of us versus how they could be. Now, Andrew talked about rediscovering the why, and Eckhart talked about having to really pick the right mindset for moving forward. So the first one is how it is versus how it can be. And Duncan actually outlined the necessity of thinking about how it can be. Duncan then moved on from there to talk about the difference between blind optimism and, I guess, brutal optimism. And we joked about the blood nose being the icon for 2023. But the idea behind that is that if you're in the fight, then take your best step forward. And that's really about staying in the ring and understanding that once you step out, it's over. You need to stay in the fight in order to achieve anything. And out of that, it was beautifully highlighted, and Rico, I think, said it best, talking about foreign investment, that we need to change a short-term approach to a long-term approach. And I think South Africans are often great at making things happen, and we're used to living in flux and change, but that is why we often have a short-term approach. And so what we need to do is to step back and have a far longer-term approach. For example, we should be greatly encouraged that there is an increase in foreign investment. That means that people over in the first world across the pond who are used to all their stability are looking at us and seeing something that they find highly desirable. And finally, Duncan talks about the return of the mad scientist entrepreneur. And I think this again ties into the idea of brutal optimism, of being willing to do one or two crazy things in order to take steps forward. The last point I want to touch on is that the long-term view can seem like a luxury, but if we can find good partners, then the sky is the limit. And that's what Andrew talked about in his blue skies business approach. What he found necessary was partners. So find that brutal optimism, find the mindset, and then find a partner that ties in to that mindset in order to be able to step back and see just how exciting the wine industry in South Africa can be. So thank you for that. I know that was quite a long summary. Was it a summary at all? Who knows? But I just wanted to thank our panel, Duncan, Andrew, Rico, and Eckhart. And it occurred to me that the first letter of each of their names spells out the word dare. And I'm sure that's just a coincidence, but it's also an amazing reminder that he who dares is also he who wins, or rather, those who dare are those who win. To our Aussie audience members, happy Australia Day. And to our viewers in India, happy Republic Day. Here's to everyone else, happy Wednesday. See you soon.